All right, Pat, we've got the first of a couple episodes that where the title is the most self-explanatory thing you could possibly ever get. Season 4, episode 8, The Mountain and the Viper, or as I like to call it, the beginning of the wrap-up for season 4, getting us ready for the next couple of seasons of this show. You have anything to say before we get into this?
Dom, I think the Talking TV family that watches us here on Talking Thrones is going to agree with me that this episode should be called The Optometrist and the Viper.
Yeah,
not the mountain.
To say it the least in so many words. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talking Thrones. Oh, man. Well, after last week's, quite frankly, very surprising episode, I gotta say, this episode was literally a whirlwind of emotions on the rewatch. This is always an episode that I look forward to just because of the end fight. And it's not quite a rear-loaded episode like Laws of Gods and Men or Lion and the Rose, where all the stuff happens in, like, the second half of the episode and the first half is kind of filler. There's some good stuff that happened in this episode, for sure. But it's definitely not one that in hindsight I look back on. I think I'm going to look back on as fondly as I remember. I don't know. What's your take on that?
It's, I will say watching this again, this is like the third or fourth time I've seen this episode. And at this point, the fight is really where it's at. That's the moment that you really want to get to. Everything else is kind of beautiful setup for the rest of the season. But yeah, it's our wrapping things up or really just sort of, getting things into place. But the fight is just where all the basically spectacle is in this episode.
Absolutely. It's where all the marbles are. It's got everything that you love about Game of Thrones. It's got kind of like, again, like the intrigue moment that's building you up towards what you think is a certain moment before it pulls the rug out from you at the last minute. And this one, it's kind of hard to top the Red Wedding, obviously, as far as this thing where you have such this idea in your head as far as what's going to happen, and then the ending comes around and it so shocks you out of it. You're like, whoa, okay, was not expecting that at all to happen. And this one will be in a much more enclosed setting. Again, just the way when I think about reading this on the page, just the complete shock and intrigue and how accurately it was portrayed and just really how gross it comes. And really just the fact that it comes from one character's just gross overconfidence in himself. Ultimately, it to me, that fight specifically, there's a reason why people remember this episode, because it's another one of those moments where when you think of what Game of Thrones represents, both as far as like it shows identity, this is what you think. These are the types of moments that you think of, And what were you going to say?
Oh, no. I basically, I was going to jump in and talk about like the ending of the fight, how inconclusive the fight is, but Tywin's just like, yeah, hey, Tyrion, you're done.
Pretty much. It's well, because the whole fight itself is just this battle of wills at the end of the day between Tywin and Tyrion. That's the beauty of it. You're getting it in twofold. It's this battle of wills between Tywin and Tyrion to see who ultimately can get the upper hand mentally, because it's really been this kind of mental game of chess ever since Tywin first came back to King's Landing at the end of season 2, beginning of season 3. And then you're also obviously getting the actual fight between the titular Mountain and the Viper, where Oberyn is finally getting the chance to extract revenge or attempt to extract revenge for the wrong that has been committed against his family, both against the Mountain who actually carried out the deed and Tywin, who he has unconfirmed, allegedly ordered the deed done as well. So you've got all this different tension going into the fight itself, which just makes it so beyond interesting and fascinating to watch. Problem is that we've got the first half of the episode, and we're into this phase that I like to call wrap-up phase, where season 2 did something similar to this, where because you had the 9th episode be this one completely enclosed battle sequence that takes place entirely in one location, they had to kind of use episode 8 as their penultimate episode, and that caused like this kind of weird dissonance where some storylines ended in that episode and then they really got wrapped up in the 10th episode, even though they were kind of already over. And I will say that this episode, I think, does a better job than season 2, but there are definitely still a lot of weird feelings where it's like, okay, we kind of got to catch up on all the, ancillary storylines that we, that we kind of haven't been spending as much time with. We obviously spent some time in Meereen. We have a great opening sequence in order to kick it off and kind of prepare us for next week's battle for next week's big battle at the Wall. Theon actually does something this episode. We wrap up the stuff in the Vale, at least as far as Sansa goes. And there's one like kind of really kind of funny moment sort of with Arya that I kind of want to pick your brain on. But let's get started. Incredible, fantastic opening sequence, like great build up to it. You know, obviously, you know, you have the Moles Town. They're all chilling after a long, hard days of doing whatever it is they do in Moles Town.
They're sort of kind of complaining to Gilly, right? You know, that she's not really
the one girl is.
Yeah, that she's basically, hey, step up. You know, you got to do the work here. We're kind of feeding you. We're giving you a house and all that type of stuff. And Gilly's the first one that kind of recognizes something's wrong because she hears the bird calls and whatnot, and she realizes that, you know, those are kind of wildling calls, and, you know, it shouldn't be happening here in Moles Town, but it is. And, you know, she basically grabs her child and hides, you know, in the you know, I don't know, like a closet or something. But
something like that. Well, real quick, because I think the woman that was threatening her was kind of just like, oh, I'm drunk, so I'm going to just pick on this one girl because she's like, oh, supposedly not pulling her weight, even though she probably actually is pulling her weight. It's just a matter of, oh, she's an easy target kind of, you know, that's kind of what I saw that as.
100%. And I think it's like, just to give Moles Town a little bit of character before we go ahead and slaughter everybody.
Kill everyone.
You know, because what is it? It's just basically the place where the Night's Watch come and it's sort of like their bordello or like their
where they come to take a load
supply channel, you know, whatever. You know, it's where the kind of youngest members sneak off to have some fun. And, you know, it's just a nearby town. That's it. And, you know, the main thing is here come the wildlings. They're south of the wall. They're kind of doing their raiding campaign, and it was just a matter of time before Moles Town was on their list.
Right, exactly. And as we see, you know, Ygritte obviously gives them a little bit of a I don't know if that's the fact that she recognizes that Gilly's a wildling or just that she sees the baby, but whatever the case, Ygritte spares Gilly. I thought that was kind of a little bit, I always thought that was kind of a little bit of a cool moment. It's like, ha, Jon's girl and Sand's girl, you know, they're having like a little bit of a connect there, but it cuts to the Night's Watch and you see Jon.
Yeah, did they ever meet?
No,
Gilly
never.
So
never.
Yeah, she
so they wouldn't
really know.
They wouldn't know, but so I'm assuming that it's because of the baby, but also maybe because I don't know, maybe like it's like that wildlings have that kind of intuitive sense of each other where they kind of like there's a like an inherent difference between the people who live north of the wall and the people who live south of the wall. But whatever the case may be, it cuts to the wall. It cuts to the wall. Jon, Sam, Gren, Pippin, Dolores, Ed are sitting there having drinks. They're kind of stewing because obviously Sam's torn up because he thinks that he sentenced Gilly to death. Gren's pissed because they can't leave the wall in order to avenge the brothers that died. But Jon is kind of, you know, setting them all straight. And it's like, look, we got to follow the rules. You know, I'm not saying that it was good what happened to them, but they knew the stakes. They knew, you know, the brothers that died in the Moles Town raid. They're like, they knew what was up. And if they hit Moles Town, we're next. And Jon knows, like Jon, because again, Jon is at this point, he's really getting set up to, you know, to be in this leadership position. He had much less screen time this season than I thought initially. Like that, I thought that the Night's Watch storyline, like obviously this is the beginning of like the Night's Watch, like really starting to take precedence. But like I forgot they don't have as much screen time this season as I remember. But at the end of the day, they know, they're like, look, we've been prepping for this all season long. Ever since we got back from their quest north of the wall, you know, they kind of give Sam a little bit of words in order to coax him and make him feel better as far as how many things Gilly's actually survived. But they're like, yeah, look, at the end of the day, we can't worry about Gilly and the baby. We can't worry about the brothers we lost. We got to hunker down because we know next episode, the battle is coming, you know, and it is, oh man, one of my favorites, you know.
I think, you know, for this season, yeah, the Night's Watch doesn't really have too many big storylines. Like obviously they go up north to Craster's and the whole storyline of burning the house down and, you know, getting rid of sort of the deserters,
the mutineers.
Yeah. So that sort of like holds us over for the, you know, first half of the season, you know, more. And then it all comes down to this battle at the wall, which is a big episode. I'm looking forward to it next week. But ultimately, you know, this season, you know, gives us enough of the wall to sort of continue the storyline. But they're not really ready to reveal the, you know, the major White Walker threat, you know, like how big that threat is. And next season, you know, if I remember correctly, is Hardhome. Yes. And that's where we really get the escalation of like White Walker's bad. We need to take care of this like right now. And it really takes that Night's Watch storyline to the next level. So
absolutely,
you know,
I agree.
This season is still like simmering on the back burner. We're like milking any of the drama that we can out of what's going on in the situation in the North. but next season is where they're ready to escalate things.
Right, absolutely. It's getting there. We know that obviously, after the Battle of the Wall, we have Stannis finally coming north. We have next season, we have Jon being elected as Lord Commander and him finally beginning the expedition of starting to bring the wildlings south. So, the Night's Watch is definitely getting set up for, something big over the next couple seasons. But for now, we just leave it at that for that great opening scene. Now let's cut into some of the actual main storylines that we have. We start off in the north with Moat Kylan. We're back with Theon and the Boltons. And Ramsay and Theon, they're finally enacting their long-awaited, long-stewing grand plan in order to have, Reek pose once again as Theon, wear his Ironborn colors, walk in and convince the rest of the Ironborn to surrender.
Come on. He walks in, he's tremoring, he's got sweats, he's just reading from a script. It's just Ramsay Bolton believes that you should give up and let you free. And
convincing performance for the most part.
I don't know if it was because he, like I said, he's sweating. He's just
well, it probably helps that the Ironborn soldier. Well, it probably helps that all the Ironborn soldiers they are slowly dying from disease. They've been stuck there for God only knows how long. They've had absolutely no reinforcement from the sea, not ever since that failed expedition, of Yara's a couple episodes ago in order to try and save Theon. They pretty much run out of food. They probably had to eat some of their horses, which have probably become infected. They are.
The main thing is the commander, the one in charge that Theon's talking to, actually reads him like an open book.
He does.
100%.
He's got that. What is it called? The Iron Code or whatever it is that we keep making fun of them for. Remain steadfast even to the point where it doesn't benefit him.
A one time out of 100, that code's gonna work, and this was the time. And one of the other person pays the iron price. Because
the problem is that other person ends up paying the iron price for all of them. But I will say, in this sequence, though, the big takeaway for me, obviously besides Ramsay's speech, which is great, and kind of how he continues to reaffirm to Theon, it's yes, you know who you are. You always know who you are. You're Reek, no matter who you pretend to be. And the thing that I think really affirms it is the fact of when the guy kind of breaks him down, and the way that he starts stammering, and the way that you start to see cracks in the fissure. Once again, I still think that this is the absolute best performance-wise that acting-wise that Alfie Allen is on the entire show this season, just portraying just how broken Theon is as a character. And then the poor bastard, the second in command, who ends up killing the one captain and is clearly can't read. It's great. I feel so bad for this guy because he's so desperate. He kills the captain, sticks an axe in his head, and it's just this paper. It says if we surrender, we get to go home. And Theon just kind of nods. And the next scene is that same dude flayed, and I'm just
it's probably the best flayed makeup this show is ever going to produce, right?
Easily.
And, really disturbing. You can definitely see every single thing, those ribs and
the ribs, the chest bumps, everything.
Really, really good makeup effects, and it's one of those things where it's why would you pay the iron price, right?
You paid the iron price indeed.
You wanted to believe something so bad that you were willing to put yourself in a bad position.
Yes.
And that's the definition of, what the Ironborn do.
Yeah.
They just do things despite the fact that it could get them killed. It doesn't matter. That's just who they are. And it's whatever. They pay the consequences and we move on, and there will always be more Ironborn to continue this hard life that they decide that they're going to live.
Yes, indeed. And as they show, Ramsay, it ends up benefiting them. Ramsay, the kind of, I love how Ramsay just kind of reminds me, just we had to maintain our principles. What would we be without them? And then obviously they meet up with Roos's army. It's a really interesting shot that we have Ramsay's army in front of Roos's army, kind of a micro escalation of the tension that's going to come from them over the next couple of seasons. They meet up with them. Ramsay presents his father with the flag. Roose seems just a little bit impressed. Okay, I didn't think much that you would be able to do this, but you did. And so he kind of brings him over and kind of affirms it. Was all right, so now that you've officially been made my heir, look over there. It's what do you see? And he's
well, this is the best part. Is Ramsay's just hills, trees, and,
you're right,
and all this. And then he's no, look again. And he's no, I see nothing. That's the greatest thing that Ramsay says.
It's fucking hilarious. It's great because it's so comedic, but it also instills so much, which is that Roose it shows the difference between them, which is that Roose ultimately at the end of the day is, despite being a Bolton, he is the tactician. He sees the grand overall view. He understands that now that they've dealt with this micro problem of the Ironborn and Moat Kylan, now that effectively forcing all the Ironborn out, they understand that they now control the North. And as he says, even though they are technically in alliance with the Lannisters, he understands that now that they have taken back the north, essentially with no help from the Lannisters as well. They now control the largest of the Seven Kingdoms. He even says it's larger than any of the other Seven
400
Kingdoms.
miles this way, 300 miles that way.
Right.
Essentially, it's basically like they rule New York State. Like
essentially.
They basically have that big of an area.
I feel like a more accurate description would be Texas, maybe, only because Texas is bigger land-wise.
I think Texas, we'd have to look at the map and see the mileage, but I believe New York State fits the description of like 400 miles. Like
close
Texas
enough,
might actually be bigger. But like, that speaks volumes about the rest of the kingdoms.
It's the description people-wise, too.
They are, So, I think the main thing is, regardless of what it compares to in the real world, the main thing is Roose really values having control over the vast lands.
Right.
And, the idea...
Ramsay kind of has this more like very narrow-minded view as far as he really can't see past like his next torture or his next kill.
Yeah, I think Ramsay it's more about, what he thinks power is, right? Because Roose thinks, owning the most land is going to position them to have the most power over the rest of the kingdoms. But I don't think Ramsay necessarily sees it that way. I think it's his cunning, his sadistic nature, what he's willing to do on the battlefield. I think those are the things that he thinks really garners him power.
Yes, absolutely, and it shows obviously in the next couple of seasons. You see the differences between the two as they clash, and ultimately it's their fracturing of their relationship and kind of where one values power over the other that kind of leads to the destabilization of the Bolton regime. But it ends with them. They've conquered the North. The Boltons are officially the new Wardens, the Liege Lords of the North, and it ends with them officially moving into Winterfell. Let's cut to Meereen, where, again, we're in another wrap-up phase. And once again, we cut to, we got Dany and Daario last week. So now this week, we get the other love story in Meereen. More of Grey Worm staring creepily at Missandei as they bathe.
Yeah.
Like,
listen.
Oh, man.
The only thing worth saying here is the conversation between Daenerys and Missandei. Listen, dude, like, just the whole idea is, like, have you ever thought about... Did they take everything with how equipped is Grey Worm still?
Oh my
did they take
God.
the pillar and the stones?
The pillar and the stones? Does he have anything to work with here?
Yeah, I think I kind of love just like the just how intimate they get with the conversation. This is sort of a nice sweet scene of two young women sort of being kind of blunt with what they're working with here, and they're still trying to have some sort of power dynamic between the two of them, right? They kind of they can't just be crude, they have to sort of be civilized, but it's just shows sort of them being comfortable with each other, personable, and basically having this friendship that Daenerys really doesn't express with anybody else. So they're really confidants, and like where Daario this season essentially became, sort of her lover, but like, really just the boy toy, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's like she's controlling him through, his basically desire for her. So she's growing these personal relationships with the people that are around her, and we're getting these like really specific scenes that show like the dynamic between her and her followers, and I think it's really good that they started peppering that in this season. Despite the fact that she's sort of just like sitting there hanging out in Meereen doing not much story wise.
Yeah, it's definitely more so, like I said, it's the establishment of her learning to be a queen in every single aspect of the ward, including with her followers as well as her subjects, her immediate small council, and how that's established here as far as her continuing to bond with Missandei, and then how that kind of transcends into Missandei's conversation later on with Grey Worm. They kind of have a little bit of a repeat of the discussion that they had a couple episodes back when Grey Worm first led the invasion of Meereen, where she's like she tries to comfort him over the fact of when he lost his manhood, when he was cut when he was a kid, and he once again admonishes the fact of it's like if none of that had happened to me, I wouldn't be where I am today, but more stuff like that. But the real centerpiece of this episode is the jar reveal and banishment, which
is great.
It's
some
great.
Kid just runs up, hey Sebastian,
Sebastian.
I just happened to find this pardon on the side of the road.
I love Jorah knows exactly what this is. Like, and kind of a little bit on Barristan too, where Barristan should wise up and understand exactly what this is, you know, and how Jorah, once again, kind of showing how Jorah might still be better equipped to serve her than Barristan, which it's still a big problem that I have with just the treatment that that Benioff and Weiss took with Sir Barristan in the show versus the book, where in the show they show that even though he is still very effective, he's old and he's not as equipped as he may well think, and we see how that pans out later. So
I'm just really surprised that this storyline is like just a couple flash scenes, because Barristan goes up to Jorah and he's like, I just wanted to speak to you man to man first. And, you know, I think the fact of the matter is, like, he's right to say you'll never be alone with her again, but why doesn't Barristan sort of, you know, keep this on the down low and be like, I'm watching you type of thing?
Right, exactly. Like,
kinda,
it would more so be like,
extend the storyline.
Right, look, like he's been with them long enough. Like, I feel like if Jorah would have made a move, he would have. You know, why like immediately bring this up? And this is a point where I'm going to get to, because this is another change that they made from the books, and I'll explain exactly how. So in the books, famously, when Dany meets Sir Barristan, like before they move on Astapor or any of that, she's not aware of who Barristan is. Barristan is posing under a different name, and he's serving as a squire to a freed slave character named Strong Belwas, who actually was a former fighter in the Pits of Meereen, who is not included in the show at all. Like, he's non-existent, not a character in the show at all. And for the longest time, you don't know that it's Sir Barristan because he's going under a different name, because he was not aware. He he did serve on the small council in the books as opposed to in the show where he did not. So famously, he does know that Jorah is a traitor, and he uses that position in order to kind of pursue his position and figure out whether Jorah is still trustworthy or not. And what happens is that there's kind of a big clashing where, you know, where Meero, Daario's former captain who we killed last season, actually escapes from Daario and tries to kill Daenerys, and Barristan saves her and is forced to reveal himself when Jorah recognizes him. And because of that, in order to kind of stake a claim over Jorah for his own survival, he reveals Jorah's treachery, and Dany, in the moment, not really knowing who to trust, realizes that there's enough evidence to back up Barristan's claim that Jorah is a traitor, and banishes Jorah subsequently, as opposed to this kind of nonsensical thing of where it's like,
I think it's really quick, you know, and I think one of the things is, like, I think Sir Barristan, in the context of the show, like, you know, obviously there's no way that they could have, double backed and reworked
exactly, because they had already made it clear that he hadn't served on the small council. Like, they officially solidified that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the main thing is, what they could have done is, like, I'm watching you type of thing, and then just have, like, Jorah be responsible for, like, messing up some sort of tactical event, and then Barristan kind of comes out and says, hey, you know, he maybe messed this up on purpose because look at this pardon that was delivered to me by some random child on the street.
Especially since it seems like the seeds are all there, because he's literally looking at a map of Westeros. It's like he's planning, like, the invasion right there. It's like the seeds were literally laid there. But the one thing I will say is that, kind of as sloppy as the lead up to it is, the final revelation when Daenerys does finally confront him is heartbreaking, and probably the best performance that Ian Glenn has given on the show since his inception.
I think the performance in that scene is great, but, like, just story wise, I don't really feel that you would bar him at that point.
Right. It makes no sense ultimately. And we kind of have to relegate that and kind of consider that as, she's making an emotional choice because she feels heartbroken because he's the first person that she ever really thought that she could trust, you know, her only connection to her homeland for the longest time, you know? So that's kind of really
but I wish it was more devastating to her. Like, you know, if it was tied with a strategic loss on the battlefield or something like that, like, then it has weight to it. Like, right now, as it stands, it's like, oh, you mentioned that I had, you know, Drogo's child.
Right.
Like, that's the biggest news that he betrayed her with. You know, like, anybody could have, you know, told the folks in Westeros this news. Like, Jorah just did it faster.
Right.
You know, like, you know, if it wasn't, you know, that moment, it would have been like 2 months later.
Right.
You know, like, it's not really that big of a deal. You know, at least from my point of view, it's obviously a security issue. Like, you know, I wouldn't doubt that.
Right.
But, like, what are you going to do? You're just going to really keep your eye on him. You're going to limit his power.
Wouldn't it be smarter, if anything? It's where the whole adage, keep your friends close and your enemies closer kind of a thing. Would it not be smarter to keep him close rather than send him out to the wolves where he could potentially become like a greater threat?
Yeah, like it would have been better if he did something so devastating, and not even on purpose. Like it's just like they were outwitted or outsmarted, like whatever the case may be. But it's like then it's questionable, like your command, it's not good enough.
Right.
Then it would make sense for him to be banished, I think. But regardless, this is a minor detail. I think it's the television show is trying to be economical about this storyline. Like, let's just one and done. Let's do a
right,
quick
especially
sequence,
because they have to get Jorah out of the way so that they can eventually like reunite him with Tyrion for the next season, and arguably the last time that Tyrion's compelling as a character. But this kind of also factors into a larger problem, and it's more so of an overall broad problem that I have with the whole Daenerys arc rather than one specific moment, which is the decision to not make the Quaithe character from season 2, and ultimately the fact that she receives a lot more from the House of the Undying in the book version rather than what we got in Qarth way back in season 2, which is that in season 2, in addition to all those different visions that she sees, she also receives a prophecy that says she'll be betrayed by 3 people. I forget what the reasons are, but it's like one for blood, one for love, and one for money or something like that. And the whole thing is that Jorah is revealed to be the first of the 3 people who betrayed her. And so it's supposed to help build into more of her sense of, her build to eventually being the Mad Queen, the fact that she's kind of like losing her mind a little bit by buying too much into fate. Because if anything, and this is a larger problem that I have with the adaptation in general, which is a large part of the books comes from the fact that so much of the story to me is based off of false or misunderstood prophecies, where a lot of the things that Melisandre kind of builds and hypes up, they end up coming true, but not in the way that she foresaw. And they kind of sort of try to do that next season with the Stannis defeat, but I don't think it's handled very well. And the fact that they chose to forego that completely from Daenerys' arc, I'm not going to say it's a bad decision, but it's the fact of when the picking and choosing of the certain things without the full context, I think, is kind of what weighs it down and causes what are really emotionally impactful moments like these in the books to not really have the weight that they have, because the Jorah betrayal, not only to me is it handled like it kind of comes out of nowhere, where it's like, wow, okay, where it's kind of a moment of desperation and it's kind of all these different pieces coming together, but also the fact of where she's dealing with so much in the moment that she really doesn't know how to react, and it really is more of an emotional outburst rather than what seems to be a tactful and logistical decision, which is how it's presented here. To me, it lends more weight and credence to the decision, where the fact of to me, I'm not going to say it would make more sense, but it makes more sense character-wise if she has this more of more as an emotional outburst based on, based on kind of like rapidly extenuating circumstances out of her control, as opposed to just this one thing of where it's like, oh, I have now received this news and now I'm going to banish you because I'm supposed to be hurt, because that's what the scene calls for, like that. Those are the moments to me where it's like, okay, even as early as this, like they were missing to me at least, some crucial pieces of that arc.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to streamlining what's happening in Meereen. Like, Daenerys is not the main focus of the show at this point.
Right.
Like, obviously she's a beloved character by season 4 for sure. Like, everybody really is behind her and wants to see where this is going. But I think there's really just sort of she's on the back burner, and like her quest is, my understanding of the books, it's sort of like she just goes from place to place to place, and it's just sort of keeping her busy until the end of the series when she eventually comes to Westeros. Obviously, right. It's not quite written yet, but like the fact is, my understanding from just conversations with people that have read the books is that her plot line, although it's good in the books, is pretty thin, and just
to a certain extent, yes. The problem is that it gets cut off on a cliffhanger right when it is starting to get like really juicy and interesting.
Yeah. So I think the main thing is, like, with the show, she's again also put on like sort of the periphery, and it's mainly just sort of she's there. Things are happening. Let's just keep it short, simple, to the point. And I don't think until we get Tyrion, into the court that right. things, start to develop a little more. And, because they're really working now towards the whole aim towards Westeros. So I think, for this particular season, it's like, just quick bullet points, and I think we both agree that they dropped the ball on this one.
Absolutely.
I think you could have, throughout the entire season, sort of set up some like doubt on Daenerys's end, maybe she doesn't trust any of her officers. Maybe her whole affair with Dario thing is making Barristan and Jorah sort of uncomfortable, and that makes the meetings between the three of them uncomfortable, and there's some sort of tipping point where it's like, Jorah, now get the hell out.
Right, exactly. And that is definitely something that does come. Yeah, and that does come from the books as well, where there is a certain point in the books where she's just looking around and she does not, even people who she knows she can trust, she just does not know who to trust because she's surrounded by so many new strange faces since settling into Meereen that she literally does not know who to trust. So that is definitely an instance where, again, the seeds aren't quite laid yet because we haven't quite gotten to the Sons of the Harpy thing, which is, we'll get to that when we cover season 5. But to me, it really is the beginning of the end of the plot lines, which, like I said, we'll get to once we get to the very, very problematic season 5 in my mind.
But you know what, Dom? You know who should have showed up and really been Daenerys' rock?
Littlefinger?
No.
Robin Arryn?
Robin Arryn?
Your favorite character?
Hey, listen, Littlefinger has decided this episode to send him on a little voyage.
Yes, he has.
Finally, to become a man. So,
but first, he's got to get past his own trial, as we see.
Yeah, why doesn't he could just very easily travel over to Essos and saunder into Meereen and really just grow and become like the man he's meant to be.
Would have been interesting to say the least. But we pick up right immediately after Littlefinger's being interrogated by the Lords of the Vale. This is the first appearance that we get of Sir Lord. I don't remember the guy's first name, but Lord Royce, portrayed by Rupert Vansittart, who we see in every season up until the final season. He's kind of like the new kind of spearheaded co-ringleader of the Lords of the Vale, who I believe the Vale is like the second oldest realm of the Seven Kingdoms in all of them. So that, they've got their very prissy hoity-toityness. They very much established. They look down upon Littlefinger as nothing more than an up-jumped, grubby commoner. They even mentioned it's like, oh, your great-grandfather, he came from Braavos or something like that. And he's like, well, I suppose we all came from somewhere over the Narrow Sea.
Dom, I'm sorry, I'm zoning out a little bit. I'm thinking about like my fantasy casting for this scene.
Oh my god! Bob Odenkirk.
Not Bob Odenkirk. Although I think Bob Odenkirk would be great in this.
Bob Odenkirk can do anything, man.
No, mainly the cast of Law and Order SVU, right?
Oh god. Chris Maloney.
Yeah, Chris Maloney, Marissa Haggerty, basically the whole entire
little Dick Wolf up in here.
Yeah, the detectives, and they're grilling Littlefinger, and it's just why Liza go through that door,
Yeah.
And
they're like, well, we don't believe you because you're a commoner, and so we're gonna bring in the only other witness that we have. And the fact that they don't recognize Sansa, I'm like, kind of a little bit of a miss on their part, where it's like,
okay.
Really?
This is one of the things that's very interesting this episode.
You're not going to recognize Ned Stark and Catelyn Tully's daughter, like Liza's own niece?
So Sansa and Arya don't really get recognized.
Right.
Even the guards at the beginning of the castle, right? At the gates, it's like, I'm Arya Stark, and the guard's like, I don't know, like that guy.
Another flaw that I'll get to in this episode.
Yeah. His first day on the job, apparently. Clearly. It's like he doesn't remember any of the allies. That
I'll have to do some fact checking later on and see if that's the same guard as it was all the way back in season 1 when they first approached. Because if it is, big yikes on that guy's part. That guy's never going through a moon door of his own.
Like that guy's career is
fucking up on the job,
not going up.
Not good.
I guess. Well, he could fail upwards. I guess
that's true. That is true.
Westeros.
That is true.
But no, I think it's one of those things where. Sure, I think before they even see Sansa, they're just like, oh, you're traveling with somebody, your niece or something like that. And then it's like Littlefinger's like, I'll go fetch her. And it's like, no need. We got her.
We'd rather hear her. What was it?
So,
we'd rather hear her testimony unadulterated.
Exactly. So I don't think any of them in the room who are interrogating Littlefinger have even laid eyes upon her. And maybe it's like an elevated situation where like they see this red hair that's reminiscent of Catelyn, and they don't even really put 2 and 2 together. It's like they're really focused on the investigation, so I can believe that they don't really recognize Sansa in this moment. But it quickly leads to Sansa saying, "I cannot lie," basically.
Right.
Littlefinger forced me to hide my identity. I'm Sansa Stark, and it's really because not that he's a bad guy and he
Right.
wanted to deceive you, but it's because Joffrey was like made me his torture victim, and like he had to basically whisk me out of there, and to protect me, he asked me to blah 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 blah, and she goes to town.
Oh man,
or she goes
like I
to
said,
bat.
I'm like, give her the Oscar right now. That is incredible. How she is able to turn around and pull the wool over the Lords of the Vale right there, like masterful. Like I said, she really learned from her defense mechanism that she picked up in King's Landing.
Yeah, but I would say that and this is the beauty of the scene. Like Littlefinger, from the very beginning has sort of been whispering in Sansa's ear about how to play the Game of Thrones,
right.
and really preparing her, and like I don't know what his thoughts are. Like it's like
his thoughts are he's scared shitless because he realizes, oh shit, she's learning. Could she potentially be a future threat?
Well, I think he's I think he does see Catelyn in Sansa, and so there is this little thing of like, oh, I should teach her my ways and how I think, and
so that way she doesn't make the same mistakes that Catelyn did and wind up dead.
Exactly, and I think he's doing it for some sentimental reason, but ultimately in the end, it's like he basically smartens her up to how he acts, how he behaves, and this scene where it's like Sansa's like, I'm gonna go with the devil I know, and I know what you want, and Littlefinger's like, do you?
Right.
And it's like ultimately we realize like 3 more seasons that Sansa does actually know what Littlefinger wants, and takes care of business because of all the hardships that she has been through. So I think the arc, the sort of back and forth between Littlefinger and Sansa is really well done in this show because she is the pupil, and whatever she goes through,
and then she eventually becomes the Darth Vader. Learn. She becomes the Darth Vader. Well, once I was the student, but now I am the master. When she pulls the one-upmanship on Littlefinger. If anything, like I said, this is kind of like...
I don't know if Vader's
that's probably not
quite
the best
the way to go,
example,
because
but
she would have to start oppressing people.
That's true. Well, I just wanted to use that one comparison. But if anything, Sansa's arc is kind of the flip to me to Daenerys's, of where Daenerys's feels like it's missing pieces, but strangely enough, I do think that Sansa's is one of the more fully fleshed out arcs across, the whole season 5 Ramsay thing notwithstanding, because that feels like we're backtracking a little bit, but that really does feel like one of the more like, accurate, like fleshed out arcs, as far as it's like, okay, she had this idea of how the world worked, then she was stuck in this one place and kind of given a reality check in the worst way possible, that she was finally given an out, and then this one person kind of, made his intentions a little bit too clear, which now allowed her to like start to understand the way that the world really works, but also how she could like manipulate it a little bit to work in her favor. Like all the pieces are there, and it's like, it is well done to me as far as that goes. And
I still can't get over Robin though. Like,
it's incredible. Like,
the Winterfell doesn't have a moon door. Let me fix
Mommy
it.
said I can't leave can't leave it because I might die.
No, but like last episode, him just destroying Winterfell and Sansa slapping him. Like I just I just can't get over it. But Robin is that character that's been super protected. And now that Littlefinger is there, he kind of brings up that moment where it's like, oh, Robin has to go out in the world. He has to live life. He has to sort of, he can't just,
Well, first he has that big conversation with the Lords of the Vale where he kind of holds him to task, and it's like, yeah, you didn't defend your own, liege, Lysa's own sister when she needed your help, and because of that, the Starks the Starks lost. Yeah. So unless you support the Lannisters, it's about time you guys kind of enter the fray. And again,
exactly.
He's like kind of more so pushing his own buttons, placing them behind Robin, showing it's like, yeah, he needs to like actually be brought up, like turn into a real lord. Again, still keeping his kind of ambitions close to the vest, because again, this is where they started to shift up and deviate a little bit away from the books, but for the most part, we're still pretty accurate. For me, the big takeaway here was just the fact of it's like him realizing that he both did and did not make the smart move with killing Lysa right in front of Sansa and placing all of his faith in Sansa, because now Sansa has something on him and she knows it. And Littlefinger...
Yeah, but exactly. And it's one of those things where the two of them are going to play off of each other.
Right.
And
if anything, real quick though, do you think that factors into his decision to give her to the Bolt? Do you think that factors in at all? into that decision.
No. So I think one of the things is like, the point I was trying to make about, Robin is when he talks to him is the whole thing about, people die left and right, you got to live your life and you got to, sort of go out there, blah, blah, blah. I think that was the nature of it. And, it's sort of talking to the nature of, the people that you surround yourself with, and telling him to go out there and experience other things away from your mother. And then we have the flip side of like, Littlefinger and Sansa had this event where Littlefinger pushed Lysa out the door, and the two of them are linked, and they actually go all in on sort of, making that connection. And, I think it's one of those things where when Sansa says, "I know what you want," I think that's ultimately what leads to the decision. Littlefinger is thinking, "Oh my, I need to send her away as well," and so I think that leads to the whole trade with the Boltons.
Got it.
Okay. It could be the case, right?
Right. Well, because it just seemed to make too much sense as far as like, oh, Sansa's becoming a problem. I need to move her out of the way. Like in hindsight, the more I think about it, it does make more sense. Just I guess in the moment, I was just so blindsided by the decision. Obviously, because again, the knowledge of the books and the decision to replace, Jane Poole with Sansa there. Definitely for me, kind of threw me off, but obviously it ends with the badass Sansa walk. Like I said, a lot taken down a peg, a lot more in hindsight because of what comes after. But in the moment, I just remember seeing like, yes, finally, no more of like, weak, pitiful Sansa. Finally, we're gonna get smart, brilliant tactician Sansa. And fortunately, we'd have to wait like at least another season for that. But hey, at least we knew this was the beginning of that. But let's cut to the main centerpiece. It's the title of the episode. I don't know if they were Vegas betting odds on this, but I have a feeling that they would probably have a field day with this. It's the Mountain versus the Viper. But first, it starts with yet another conversation between Tyrion and Jaime in their jail cell. And I want you to take a note, take note of what I have written in the notes. You looking at the notes doc that I have right now, Pat?
Yeah, I just looked at apparently the creators of the show were taking
shots at Orson Scott Card, and I always wondered. I'm like, this conversation about this Orson Lannister. I'm like, what? Like this doesn't seem like it fits at all. And then I found that out when I watched it was this YouTuber that was ranking every episode of Game of Thrones, and he got to this episode and he talked about that, and I'm like, wait, that's where that came from? Because apparently Orson Scott Card, I don't remember if he criticized the books of the show, but apparently he criticized them, and that was their petty revenge at them. I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I don't know. Like it's the scene is like it's okay because I think it's
scene, but
I think it's one of those things that goes to speaking to Tyrion's intellect, right? That when he was sitting there at the family meetings with Tywin and whatnot, and Tywin was going on and on about like the family legacy for the 2000th time. Here's Tyrion, thinking about this cousin Orson and the Beatles, and
right,
why.
I love the line that he has where he's like, "Oh, as it turns out, a lot of books, every book has been written about great men, but far too few books have been written about morons."
Yeah, there's that, and then also the other line is like, it was written on Orson's face. I could read it like a book, but it was a language I didn't understand.
Right.
So there's a lot of interesting, moments in this monologue.
Right.
And it's one of those things where it's like your life is flashing before your eyes because you don't really think you're necessarily going to win this trial by combat. And, this is the thing that comes up, and it's really detailed. And, hey, listen, I don't know about the Orson Scott Card thing, but like if that's true, that's interesting. Maybe that's led to this being really well crafted and just like some of the nonsensical things that you think of just before facing almost certain death. It's just something that gives Tyrion and Jaime some sort of shared heritage, and like they understand who this Orson character is, and they're just sort of like giving each other insights into the past and how they reacted, and something that they probably never have spoken about before. And it's a really intimate scene between brothers, and right upon the moment before Tyrion's got to go out there and watch his trial by combat and see if he lives or dies. And I think during the combat, when Oberyn is advancing and sort of looks like he has the upper hand, like there's a big smirk on Jaime's face.
And
Tyrion. I think, Yeah, exactly. And I think like this shared moment beforehand in the prison cell, leads to this really nice moment later in the fight when it's like, oh my God, like,
He might actually win this.
They're, sort of like reminiscing and saying their goodbyes with this really roundabout story and just like cherishing their brotherhood.
Right.
But that might all be for naught because he might actually get out of this and he might survive this trial.
Right.
And
it's a great. It is Hitchcockian. It is Hitchcockian tension. This whole sequence from that initial, regardless of the Orson Scott Card references or digs or whatever, this whole sequence from that initial opening jail cell right to the end when the mountain pops over his head like a freaking grape. It is a masterclass in Hitchcockian tension building because, good Lord, you are on. I've seen this fight more times than I can count between when I've watched it in the actual episode versus watching the clips on YouTube versus just replaying it in my head. And every single time, I'm like, how the hell did he pull this off? Where after the initial discussion, you have the long walk down the hallway to him meeting with Oberyn. He's being like, you should wear armor. You should at least get a shield. You should,
you shouldn't be drinking.
Shouldn't be drinking before a fight. Yeah. He's like, yeah, you had this many with this crew. You're a great experience with fighting, And then the mountain walks on, and Ilaria is like, you're gonna fight that, and he's like, I'm gonna kill that, and he's like, that's the biggest man I've ever seen. It's just all the beats are and the bells and whistles are there.
A lot of it's great, and then Oberyn gets his spear and he flips it around.
Right,
everybody's cheering for him.
Way too many cuts in that scene too. I will add, way too many cuts.
Yeah, it
bothers me the amount of cuts in that scene.
I think the hubris of Oberyn, obviously is what does him in this sequence, and I don't know if it necessarily was well, set up in this season, that he would be this obsessive because, I understand it's like, oh, I'm going to seek revenge, I'm going to get my revenge, whatnot,
right?
But the confession,
like you said at the end of last episode, it's the fact that he's overplaying his hand. He's desperate and he's impatient too.
Yeah,
which is his biggest flaw.
To me, I feel like maybe this isn't necessary, but to me, like if they had a scene where Oberyn sort of does confront the mountain and says you need to confess, and the mountain's like, I don't even know who you are,
right?
And like that kind of angers Oberyn. And then when they get into the fight, this whole thing about, I'm going to make you confess. I'm going to make you confess. I think it would be a little bit stronger. It's okay as it is. I think it works. But, one of the things that really has always bothered me about this sequence is, he basically has him dead.
Dead to rights. Dead to rights.
Like, because Oberyn is just like, oh my God, you're dying.
Which I guess
need you to confess.
You could make the argument that that's the intent of the scene because, like I said, it's beat for beat adapted from the books. Where again, Oberyn has him dead to rights. He's on the ground. He's dying. He's stabbed with poison
he's
spear.
Literally dead.
Literally dead. All he had to do was finish the job.
The mountain is so big that he has a little bit of energy left in him, right? That he sweeps him off his feet, grabs him by sort of like the throat, knocks all his teeth out in one punch, and then basically squashes him.
And you can see, I love it. You can see the look on Oberyn's face as he lifts him up where he realizes, oh, I fucked up, and everyone is just like, oh no.
But then as soon as Oberyn is finished, basically the mountain is finished as well.
It's finished as well. So.
Both combatants are dead.
Right.
And
literally.
This is one of those things where like it's a sort of a representative metaphor here of Tyrion and Tywin and how their wits are basically always at a stalemate.
Right.
And then basically Tywin just stands up and says, Tyrion, you're dead. And to me, it's like no one objects to this. Everyone's just like, yeah,
no
let's
one
go with
raises it, especially Jaime. I'm like, if anybody had a cause, it's like, oh, that your dude's dead too. They literally killed each other.
So basically,
I guess because the mountain's still breathing at the end of the fight, just barely. Whereas Oberyn
like Ty goes to the king. I guess it's. I don't know. It's one of those things where I never sat right with me. Yeah, it never sat right with me how this scene ends.
Yeah,
because it feels like Tyrion should be like, oh, he shouldn't be like facing the death penalty or anything. If anything, like keep him in prison because they don't know what to do.
I guess just in the sense of where, because the mountain is still faintly breathing. Like I said, the logistics of trial by combat are not really that great. Probably because they've probably never had a situation like this, because pretty much every single fight before it has probably had a definitive, very clear winner and loser, But the one thing that I will say, like I said, to lead in a little bit of credence, is the fact that the mountain is still breathing. And we also know Tyrion has no supporters on his side. We know how this goes. This is not a situation of where you can demand justice, quote unquote. It is all about who is in power. And the one in power right now is Tywin. So, and Tyrion played his last hand here.
I think it would have been, better for me if the mountain sort of like, stood up and like walked out of view, and
or at least limped out,
Yeah,
the fact that he's on the ground, like
even if like Cersei, like snapped her fingers to a couple people and they like dragged him out of there, and then it would
have taken like 30 guys just to get him out of there.
But then it's like he collapses later on. It's just. I guess it's a visual thing for me.
If I'm remembering correctly, I think the thing is that he appeared much less wounded, physically wounded, because the whole thing is that Oberyn stabs him, but it's not meant to be portrayed as a fatal stab. But the whole idea being that even though the mountain, I think it's the sense that in the books, the mountain more so clearly wins the fight, even though he's on the ground, but it seems like he can recover. But then later after the fact, it's that the poison killed him slowly, versus here it's very apparent that he is not walking out of there,
whatever. It's I think mild, my kind of criticisms with the end of the fight. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it happens quickly. Like, Tyrion, you're sentenced to death.
Yeah.
And then Tyrion has that one of the best,
just like
dumbfounded looks I've ever seen on an actress'
Not
face.
even dumbfounded, just more so just disappointment, where it's like, wow, this dude.
Yeah, but he's
that's
just.
The shitty thing too, is that Oberyn ultimately placed his own. The other shitty thing too about Oberyn's death is the fact that he was doing this obviously for revenge. We know there was a double-edged sword here where he was both defending Tyrion but also getting his own revenge. And he ultimately placed, like you said, he placed himself before Tyrion in this instance and kind of forgot what he was doing rather than, focusing on finishing the fight, which is obviously, we know, a mistake that Bronn, would he have been fortunate enough to be in that position, would not have made. Bronn would have just finished the job because, like you said, Pat, Oberyn, in that instance, he may have been playing the game throughout the season, but he was not playing the game in that instance. And that's what
for sure. 100%. And, listen, it's one of those things where, like, Oberyn knows that Tywin gave the order. Like, why does he need the mountain to say
Why does he need to hear of Tywin?
Like, I think it's one of those things
it's
where
for gratification more than anything else. It's the fact that he needs to hear from Tywin Lannister, the most powerful man in the realm, come down to Oberyn's level and admit that he is just as despicable as, everyone rumors him to be, but nobody would actually say to his face. And he needed him to say that in public in front of everyone. And it was that hubris that cost him.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's one of those weird things. Like,
weird.
You're gonna start interrogating him in the trial. Like, why not stab him in both arms? Why not incapacitate the mountain for sure?
Right.
Like 100%. Like, make sure that he's not a threat to you. That he's still living, but there's not going to be any of this kind of last minute shenanigans that ended up happening here.
Exactly.
I think, it's one of those things where I guess I loved Oberyn as a character so much,
Yeah, we all did.
That it's like, it just seems like him dying in this moment
we feel so shortchanged, which again,
like, it's an awesome death. Like,
absolutely,
it's gruesome.
The death in and of itself is great. But if anything, what I will levy that onto is not necessarily what happened in the moment, but the fact that the fact that this moment is supposed to set us up for the rest of the Dorne arc. And the fact that everybody knows, regardless of how they adapted it in the book, just as far as how they wrote it for TV, they dropped the ball so hard on the rest of the Dorne arc that it kind of made this moment feel even worse in hindsight.
They get a top tier actor to come in and play Oberyn's brother, the king.
Yes.
Bashir
your favorite
from
guy,
Deep Space Nine.
Alexander Siddiq, right? I believe he also had a couple episodes in The Expanse as well.
Yeah, he's an awesome actor, doing a lot of sci-fi, and obviously
Indira Varma from Luther as Ellaria, his paramour. They dropped the ball on her. They got two pretty damn well known actors for the two of the three Sand Snakes daughter. trust me, we'll save the rest of and how they screw over Dorne next season.
Yeah,
but
I don't know. It is one of those things where like Oberon's. I guess you're basically making a lot of sense to me, Dom, because
right.
the fact that I know Dorne, only goes so far in the seasons upcoming,
right,
is really
and the
making
fact that they
this
have such
like,
a more and trust me, dude. Like, well, I'll save the Dorne plot and how badly they screwed it up by telling you, as far as like what happens with Dorne in the books. Well, once I tell you, I'm telling you, man. I might convince you to go back and read the books, because the way that they are setting up Dorne is going to have a crucial and intrinsic part to play in the final conflict in the final 2 books, if and whenever we get them that come out. And the fact that they got so shortchanged in the show is just one of a few things that the last 4 seasons get so wrong. But that is it. That is our recap of The Mountain and the Viper, season 4, episode 8. Only 2 episodes left of season 4. Make sure you guys tune in next week rather, for, oh man, I know that Blackwater is the one that kind of set the precedent, but we haven't gotten a big 1 episode showcase battle in a while. And oh man, this was probably like my favorite episode of the initial batch. It's one of my favorite episodes. The Watchers on the Wall, the Battle of the Wall that we get next episode. It's finally here. I cannot wait to cover it. We're going to cover it scene by scene, sequence by sequence, similar to the way we did Blackwater 2 seasons ago. Can't wait. Pat, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Hey, listen, right here on Talking Thrones, I'm speaking, with the Talking TV family, and, you could just come back and listen to this, and hope you enjoy the show. If just go through it again, binge it. It is a great show for a reason. And then you can find me on Instagram at Patrick W. Huber. Still haven't posted anything yet. Just whatever. I will one day.
You're gonna have so many followers by the time we're done with the show, and then maybe that'll finally give you an impetus to post something. I see what you're doing here. It's very smart strategy.
This is step 1. It's the basically do an entire podcast, saying, hey, here's my social media. And then once it's over, that's when I'm going to start posting. So
it's pretty smart. It's pretty genius.
Hey, share, get your friends, because it's coming after about 8 seasons of teasing. I'll post something. There will be a post.
I love it. Of course, follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, and be sure to follow the podcast at official Talking TV podcast across all major platforms. We're on Twitter now. Be sure to follow us there. Be sure to keep tuning into our Harry Potter first time watches that we're dropping on Mondays. We just dropped the Chamber of Secrets one. By the time this episode goes up this past Monday, Prisoner of Azkaban will be this upcoming Monday. And be sure to tune into our Twitch stream, which will be the new home for our podcast going for what? We're going to make some crack about the last shot of Prisoner of Azkaban, your favorite shot in the movie.
The freeze frame.
The freeze frame, your favorite.
Listen,
it's your one flaw with the entire franchise.
No, I don't think it's a flaw. I think it's great. But, other movies that used the freeze frame was Rambo, First Blood. It's a classic. It's a classic way to end a movie. I really do think it's classy. So,
indeed.
Hey, I'm all in on The Prisoner of Azkaban.
Let's do it. It's the best Harry Potter movie. You guys aren't going to want to miss that. And, of course, be sure to keep tuning in for new episodes of Talking Thrones every Friday on the Spotify and Apple podcast feed. And, as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film. And watch more fucking movies.
Yeah, do more to protect your eyes.
Indeed. That optometry, that's no joke. We'll see you guys next time.